Hello bass family and welcome to Everything Bass. We're on to Guided Improv 6 and we're doing something a little different here. And it really came from me teaching a private lesson recently. And it was, I was teaching someone who initially was not interested in jazz. And they started saying, hey, you know, I really would like to learn how to do a walking jazz line, but it just seems so hard and so complex. And it was that paralysis that didn't even get him to even want to try. So I wanted to show him a little thing. Now it's funny that it's an improv, but it is really truly an improv, and I'll explain why in a second. But if you've followed along with the guided improv videos, I set some form of restriction, like only use these notes, only play here on the bass, and do things like that, so that you can learn to be creative in that kind of limited area. Because by trimming away options, you can really hone and get your confidence down, and you can kind of, you know, develop a good foundation that when you start to reach out, you know, you're going to have a good anchor point to kind of get back to. Now, this was something that was taught to me early on when I was first starting on my walk, learning the bass. And again, I was similar. I thought, man, I'll never be able to play jazz. That's really hard. And a great teacher at BIT took me aside and showed me this little trick. Now, here's the prerequisites to this. Know your triads. In this case, we need to know minor triad, major triad, and a diminished triad. If you don't know those, just no problem. Just pause this video, look on my channel, and you'll see that there's earlier videos I did that cover those. You know, you'll see them. One's called major triad, one's called minor triad, one's called diminished triad. Go back and learn how to play those, and then come back here and jump right in. For those of you who know how to play your triads, this is the concept of this kind of very limited improv. First of all, we're going to just deal with walking bass lines. So we're only playing quarter notes. You can put little grace notes and ghost notes in. I did in my little demo at the beginning. But foundationally, I want you to play quarter notes. Try not to put like eighth note runs, and don't, like, you know, start playing dotted eighth notes, you know, or dotted quarter notes and an eighth note. You know, just kind of keep time with your bass line. 4 notes per measure. That's what we're doing here. That's one restriction. We're always going to start with the triad playing root 3-5. So the first chord in this is C minor. So we're going to play root, minor third, perfect fifth. Now the concept behind this improv, and also exercise number 1, is we're going to start by the 4th note that we play is going to be the half step above whatever the next root is. Now this is where you start to learn the tool set you're going to need to be able to improvise over jazz. Really any style of music, but it's definitely required in jazz. You have to be looking ahead. Now the first 2 chords are C minor. So in the first measure, I'm going to play the C minor triad. Then I'm going to play a half step above the next C, because C is the next chord. So I'm going to go, and I'll play 1 fret above, so C sharp, to the C, and then I'm starting measure 2. Right when I play that C the second time, I'm starting measure 2. So here's measure 1, measure 2. Now I played 3 notes of measure 2. I have to look at the chart and go, oh, the next chord's F. So I have to go, you know, I have to go to F. Now what I like about this, I'm already here on G. So a half step above F is F sharp, and then I can play F on the beginning of the 3rd measure. But that makes that nice little short chromatic bridge. So that, going from C minor to F, would be like this. C minor triad, half step above F, F minor triad. Now measure 4 is also an F. So you can see that the composer has 2 measures of C minor 7, 2 measures of F minor 7. So we're kind of halfway through that second set. So we start by playing F minor, half step above F, and then a half step above the next chord, which is D minor 7 flat 5, also known as D half diminished. For that, we're going to play the D diminished triad. So we have to play a half step above D. So I slide to this D sharp, and now I'm playing the D minor 7 flat 5. I start by just playing the diminished triad. Now this is where a lot of students will automatically play that twice, because we played C minor twice, we played F minor twice, but you have to be aware and cognizant that this chart goes from D half diminished to G dominant 7, 1 measure each. So you play the D diminished, and then you have to play a half step above G, and play G major scale, major triad, sorry, and then a half step above C minor. Now we are on bar 7 And you can go to the description below. You'll see our Patreon link. You can go to the Patreon account and become Backstage Pass member and download the chart. You might find it easy. I'm looking at the chart just to make sure I'm accurately telling you guys what's going on. But the 7th bar is C minor 7. The last bar of this 8-bar progression that repeats is D minor 7 flat 5 for 2 beats. So just a half note. And then G7 for 2 beats. It sounds like this. Or up here might be easier here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can't play the triad and the chromatic. We're just going to play the root of the chord, in this case starting with the D, play a half step above the next G, play the G, and then the chord, we're going to play a half step above C because when the progression repeats, it goes back to a C. So let me play that little section. So start from that last measure. And then I'm at the top of the progression again. I'm going to play the entire thing just so you can hear it without the backing track so you can really hear what I'm doing. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, even though I played it that way, there's other ways to play it. Like I went from the C minor to the F here. You could easily play the C minor triad and jump down here. And all those things set off a different chain of events that you might, be cool to play. But practice that sound of playing a triad and then a chromatic to the next triad and then a chromatic to the next triad. When there's 2 chords in a measure, just play the root of the first chord to a chromatic to the second chord, then a chromatic to whatever the chord follows that. So that's one way. And in fact, looking at my guided improv summary on the sheet, the first thing I have you do is just play through the progression using triads. So there's no chromatics. I just want you to get that foundation unit, or the second exercise is what we just did. Now the third exercise is you can do it both ways, meaning instead of coming half step above, you can come from below. That would sound like this. So starting from the C minor to the C minor, half step below C, now to F, to D diminished, to G dominant, to C minor. Now half step below the D, half below the G. So you can see it just has a different flavor. And practice both ways, like rigidly, like always do a half step above, then on a repeat, always do half step below, because that's setting up to our last exercise, exercise 4. Now mix and match them. But you're going to see that sometimes there's going to be, one will be a little better choice than the others. I know better is a subjective and you guys might not agree, but let me give you my point and then take what you will of it. Let's look at that C minor to F minor. So we have C minor. Now if we do a half step below, that's a form of trapping. I play above the note that I'm going to ultimately end up. I play below the note, and then I play the note. But one of the strongest ways to lead is with this, these 2 chords, is to play the triad in a half step above. As I talked before, that's a very pleasing chromatic walk down that everyone, non-musicians, will know exactly where you're going. It's a really great way to use the bass line to lead the whole, everyone who can hear it, into the next chord. There's no surprise there. But let's look at going from the D half diminished to the G dominant. The D half diminished has a D triad, so we're going to play D, F, A flat. Now, the reason I stopped there is a half step above G is A flat. So when we're doing a half step above, we end up playing that twice. Now, to make it a little more interesting, I dropped it down an octave. Like that, and that's okay. But if you really want to be, I think, cooler and you want to like not stagnate on that A flat for 2 beats, then that's a good choice for a half step below. Now let's say you decide not to go to that G. You're going to stay on this G. That's classic trapping. I'm playing a half step above the note I'm ultimately going to end on. I play a half step below the note I'm going to ultimately end up, and then I play that note. That's also very strong. Stronger than the earlier where it was a whole step above and then a half step below. This is stronger because 2 chromatics really kind of pointing the listener to that ultimate note. Now, another choice, I've got this G major going to C minor. If I was to go a half step below the C, I end up just playing this. Now that doesn't add any new information. That's really not totally leading us to the C. It's okay, but when you do this, half step above, you get that chromatic walk down. Now listen to how strong that leads from the G dominant to the C. That's really strong. Now let's compare it to a half step below the C. See, there was no real new information. There was no, I could have just been doing this for all the audience knows. It's okay if you do that, that's fine. But if you really want your strongest leading, that half step above is sweet. So experiment. I came up with those on my own, meaning once I was shown this triad, chromatic, I started finding, oh, in this case, when these chords move between these functions, I like doing this and I like doing this, and I had reasons. Now, playing over and over and over again, sometimes you'll play a progression in a jazz band, 50, 60 times, more if the tempo is really high. And so you might want to try some of the other leadings. They're not bad. It's just sometimes one way will be stronger than the other. But I hope you guys dig this, especially if you're a little intimidated by walking bass lines, walking jazz bass lines. This is a good putting your toe in the shallow end of the pool, kind of getting used to mixing triads or chromatics, and I think getting a good confidence going so that you can go into deeper. Because this isn't the end of the story. I mean, you would have a limited jazz career if you did only this when you played through a bunch of jazz songs. People would know, and they would talk. But let's start this as a first domino, and then hopefully I can add more into your walking bass lines. Now, some of you guys have been coming to these guided improvs to learn better soloing ideas. You can do that with this, but you probably want to maybe experiment with like doing all eighth notes, but make the last eighth note a half step above or below the next chord. But ideally, it's crafted as a really great way to get your walking underneath you. So what do you think? Let me know your comments. Have you done something similar? Maybe you're a teacher yourself. Is there things you can share that we all could learn from? I would love to have that. All right, guys, that's it. Guided Improv 6, Triads plus Chromatics. For the encore item, because you might be checking this out and searched on like beginning jazz walking bass lines and found this, and thanks, I'm glad you're checking it out. But this is just such a scratching the very slightest bit of the surface of learning to be a good jazz walking player. So I wanted to recommend a book that I love from a player I just admire ridiculously, and that's the Jazz Bass book by John Goldsby. This book, wow. First of all, I got to know John through his articles in Bass Player magazine, and then following him online and checking out his recordings. And he is one of my favorite players. And so when I saw this book, I bought it, and it's great because a lot of times when I'm talking to students about getting into a new genre, they're intimidated about jumping in at midway, or like I'll recommend a book and they go, well, yeah, but does it really cover the foundation, the beginning? This does. And there's on my version, because I bought it many moons ago, it has a CD. I believe on newer versions you have a MP3 download code, which is I think better, because here's the thing. When I got this in the mail, my CD was broken. I'd never been able to play the CD. But just to tell you how good of an instructor he is, I didn't need it really, because I actually just could learn what he was writing about, and it is phenomenal. There's a lot of things I like about a book like this. One is it talks about the actual mechanics of creating a walking bass line, but then he goes through the history of the people who played, introduced me to players I didn't know about, gives samples of how they walked, and it can go as you can see, it's a rather thick book. In the end, you are really just covering some amazing things, and it moved my playing I can't even describe it. It took my playing to definitely the next several levels. So if jazz is something you've been struggling with, or you've been scared to kind of get into, I get it. I was that guy. The jazz bass book, Technique and Tradition by John Goldsby, brilliant. Check it out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this play along. Oh, by the way, if you do become a Patreon subscriber and become a Backstage Pass member, not only can you download the chart, but I will have a really better version. I'm using my looper for the play along track here, but actually I go into the studio and I make a very clean play along track that's 2 minutes long, so that you can kind of get into a groove and practice these ideas. Now, it is the first 8 bars of Blue Bossa. Most of you guys probably knew that already. So you can actually just practice over too. Use your own device, use scales, use stuff. But if you're just looking for play along things that you can use as devices to move your improv to the next level, I'd be honored if you chose my play alongs. They're WAV files because I think they're the most flexible. They can work with most media players, and if you have like GarageBand or any kind of DAW system, you can actually download the track right into your system and record over it and actually make your own recordings. I just felt it was best. If it's not the best, you let me know and I'll give you what you need. Okay? Thanks guys so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate if you subscribe to this channel. I appreciate if you could share this with other bass players. Give me a like if you liked it. If this is something you want me to explore further, the more likes I get, the more likely I am to keep this going with deeper and deeper improvs. I have musicians on cue where the future play-alongs won't be so simplistic. I'm making them simplistic so I don't like influence your rhythm ideas and things like that. But in future improv, guided improvs, I'm going to have a great guitar player come in and a great keyboard player, and we're going to actually give you a real jam along track. All right, well that's it. Thank you so much. We're in a time recording. We're just starting off the June 2020. I started this channel in January 2020, and it's been just a pleasure getting to know so many more members of my family, getting both the Facebook group going, your guys' comments here, the subscribers, everything's just making me feel so good, and I'm really thankful for you in my life. You're very important to me. And 2020 has been a hard year with a lot of big challenges. And it's easy to feel alone. It's easy to feel like no one cares, but I care. And my email address is dtitus@daletitus.com. If you need to reach out to somebody, if you're having a hard time, I don't have any answers. I don't have any certificate where I could effectively counsel you, but I have good ears, and I would love to let you know that you're important and maybe help you find people to help you if you need them, okay? Because you're part of the greatest family in the world. You're part of the bass family, and you're important. And I love you. Take care, guys.